Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Harvesting Justice podcast brought to you by Pro-Life San Francisco. I'm the executive director, Melanie Salazar, and today I'm with my colleague, Robert Byrd,
How's it
and
going?
our guest, Elise Ketch. Welcome to the show,
Thank you.
Elise. Thank you for
Thank
being here
you.
today. Great. Well, we are excited to get into it, and I look forward to our audience to be able to learn from you because I know you are a wealth of knowledge. So, Elise, let's just start off by hearing from you. Tell us a little bit about your journey. What led you into the pro-life movement and how did you get involved with secular, progressive, and investigative pro-life work?
Right. So let me try to summarize it. I've always been pro-life, and when I was in college, I was challenged to think outside of the religious box and to say, is there a secular reason to oppose abortion? Because I really believed in the separation of church and state. And that's how I found secular pro-life. And I found a lot of their arguments. And I realized, oh, there is really good arguments against abortion. And then, let's see, in 2022, as the Dobbs decision was coming out, I started writing for secular pro-life and especially writing against arguments that I saw coming out that just didn't make sense. And they posted some of that on their blog. And then it was also 2022, wasn't it? The first women's march that progressive anti-abortion uprising opposed happened. And I didn't know about the organization. I knew Rehumanize International was going to be there, and I knew Taking Feminism Back was going to be there. So I showed up, and that's how I kind of got associated with progressive anti-abortion uprising. And then I was definitely like tangential to them during the Dobbs oral arguments that day when we did that protest in front of the Supreme Court. And then Center for Medical Progress happened way later. David Delighton saw my work with Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising and then contacted me in 2024 and was like, hey, I'd be interested in using you as a new voice on my interviews, on my research reports. And he also then was like, I see you have some design skills and some video skills, so why don't we pull you into some projects and see what you can do? And that's kind of where I am now.
That's awesome.
Great. So you have worked with both secular and progressive groups. How does your approach to advocacy maybe differ in those spaces or overlap?
So I've worked with both secular and progressive groups. There's definitely overlap because a lot of progressives are secular. That's just like a natural progression, I guess. However, I do know a lot of progressive religious people, so it doesn't have to overlap, but it does a lot. And I got really involved with the secular stuff because I really believed in that separation of church and state, and that's how I found secular pro-life. And then Monica Snyder, their executive director, took me in and then added me to their philosopher team because she saw how interested I was in especially fetal personhood and arguments about it. So got more involved with them, and I just developed this really strong commitment to secularism in my anti-abortion practice. As much as my religion feeds me and also keeps me going, keeps me motivated in this space, the foundation of it is a very secular for me. And I want to share that with other people because I think everyone should be pro-life. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what your political stance is. Everyone should be. And that's how I got into the progressive space too. I realized I am one of the few young, progressive, queer, anti-abortion people who has an attractive face. I'm kidding. But who is ready to put themselves out there and be a spokesperson for that contingency of the movement, which is very much a minority. But I thought that by getting out there, I could influence more people to come out as pro-life or to consider being pro-life in the first place. So I got more involved with progressive anti-abortion uprising because of that. Teresa Bukovac and Lauren Handy really drew me in by teaching me about nonviolent direct action and rescue and asked me to make content about that. And then the rest is history.
The being camera
So
ready.
Yeah, okay, all
Go
right.
ahead.
you have a very interesting perspective or philosophy on fetal personhood. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, so my perspective on fetal personhood is largely influenced by Kristina Oktukovic, who is a Serbian pro-lifer and philosopher. And she has this perspective, she has this account of personhood that personhood is ultimately your active and inherent relation to an ultimate sortal, which I'm going to call, instead of ultimate sortal, I'm going to call it your collective humanity. Like the humanity that we all have, you have this relationship to it because you are somehow kin to it. And so you have a kinship relation where other humans would recognize you as their kin at some point in your lifespan. And then as long as you are attaining, retaining, or reattaining that connection with other people as kin, then you're a person. So you, as long as you always have that active relation, and active means it's attaining, retaining, or reattaining, then you have personhood. So that's going to include people in comas. That's going to include preborn people, and everything in between. And I think it's a really cool.
What were those three you said?
Attaining, retaining, and reattaining.
Attaining, retaining, and reattaining.
Yeah.
Okay.
So either you're getting whatever it is that makes you a person, or you're maintaining it, you're keeping it at the same level, or you're getting it back because you had it before. And as long as you're doing one of those three things, you are still a person. And everyone is always fluctuating throughout their lifetime in their relative level of how much they relate to peak humanity. Like, what is the total capacity of a human being, and how does it make it totally different from like a shellfish? And that, I think, is very important. It's not specious, because other species do attain a similar level of these capacities in such a way that we do recognize them as kin often. I think of gorillas and how we can communicate with them, or dolphins. They might be considered people and have personhood someday. Aliens, definitely, if they're intelligent. Spirits, ghosts, God, whatever. So there's no particular species that has to be attributed to this account. It's just relative to humanity as the locus point, because it's where we start. I think I'm a person, and everyone else that I think is a person, I judge relative to myself. And not trying to be narcissistic, that's just how your perspective works. It starts with yourself, and then you go outward. I think that ultimately, preborn people, I'm already like creating a closed loop. They're already people, but preborn humans are in this attainment process, and we can see them as kin because of that. Or we will see them as kin someday, so they already are people.
Me having to kind of invent common parlance. Particularly people who identify as pro-choice might say that, oh, well, the example of a person in a coma, it is because they're able to reattain their full capacities that makes them a person, while an unconscious fetus can't be considered a person. But that's only part of the equation, according to this, because being able to reattain certain characteristics like active consciousness, participation in social activity, that's only some of who are our kin. You don't have to already be currently doing that, recently done it in the past, to be considered worthy of protection and as a fellow member of the species. If you've never been engaging in those actions yet, you can still be considered part of the group. That's kind of one way of putting it, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the question I ask them is, why are you excluding people who are attaining? Again, I'm already assuming they're people. Why are you excluding beings that are attaining? And I think that could apply to preborn dolphins and preborn gorillas. Why do you exclude them? Why is that process any different? And often it will come back to, well, aren't like sperm and ovums and gametes attaining? And I would say that it's different because sperms and ovums are trying to attain capacities that are not specific to a particular being. They're kind of projecting their potential onto the future, whereas a zygote, for example, is more so minimizing potential. It's actually reducing it to a singular point, which is the individual person it is, and that it is becoming. So it has specificity that a gamete doesn't have. I'm going to be writing a blog post more about that. I have it in my drafts. While we are manifesting our potential actively, we have active potential and we have humanity because of that. A gamete has passive potential that they're just projecting into the future, that it's not real. It's not actively existing. It's not actively and inherently existing as a relation. It does not have the same relation.
Just like how we can consider any one of the skin cells in the fingertip of our pinky,
Yeah.
just because a scientist could do some activate certain induced pluripotent stem cells. Just because there's potential in the cells in my fingertip doesn't mean I should consider any of them persons at this point. They aren't
Exactly.
organisms, so
They aren't
all this
organisms, and
builds.
if you're not an organism, then you aren't in that active and inherent relationship. I don't think it's specifically because you're an organism that you have this relationship. It is the nature of organisms to have this relationship. So you can't say, oh, it's because it's an organism. That's too reductive. That's kind of like scientific biological reduction, and I think a lot of pro-lifers get stuck there. And I don't think it's helpful. I think you have to say it's because organisms are in this active and inherent relation and we can prove it that they are then people. So you can't equate them as the same exact thing, even though they happen at the same time.
Yeah, there's a whole lot more to learn and research, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful that you've been a resource and will continue to be a resource for the community to look at, not just the pro-life community, but everyone who's looking into these questions to find the truth for themselves.
Yeah, and I know it's confusing, and if you're on my page, Anti-Personhood, I have better explanations that I've really thought through and tried to explain in simple terms what I mean. I'm just giving you the basic run through, and it's not super intuitive, but I hope it helps people.
Cool. First introduction, first spotlight.
Yeah.
Perfect. So on the topic of the fetal organ harvesting, the solicitation of organs from parents who are still pregnant, what first alerted you to this practice of medical centers, abortion centers, and research institutions? Was there like any particular moment or case or some published report that made it more urgent for you, that made it personal? What was your introduction to all of this?
Well, I think I accepted early on that Planned Parenthood sells body parts because I saw David Daleid's videos and I said, oh, they admitted it. They sell body parts. It's that simple. And I didn't realize none of my friends were seeing these videos because of the way the Facebook algorithm works. So I was seeing them and I was like, everybody must know now that Planned Parenthood is evil. I was like, wait, no, why are my friends still arguing that it's okay? Because they hadn't seen these videos. Thank you, Facebook algorithm, for putting us all in a bubble. But
Yeah.
luckily I had some relatives that kept me out of that bubble. And so David Daleid's videos. And then the second thing, I think Rehumanized International spread something that probably David uncovered, but it was related to University of Pittsburgh and their experiments on rats and seeing baby scalps growing on them, these humanized rodents, and specifically seeing the soft baby hair growing off of a rodent and thinking, what if that was me? What if you scalped me and you put my scalp on a rodent and you killed me, but then kept my scalp alive? Would I be okay with that? No, I wouldn't. I would not be okay with that. That's a travesty. And not unless I like donated it to research, which obviously babies can't consent. Yeah, it was really disturbing to me that we would purposefully kill somebody to get these body parts that we then keep alive. That seemed very wrong to me.
Yeah, it's such a big double whammy that creating the procedural steps to attain these organs for use in these studies specifically, that this makes research dependent on continual killing. Like this institution, if everything's under the same roof, they'll have no incentive to stop elective abortions at 6 months or whatnot if they have another branch continuing to request the remains from the pregnant moms. It's like the inertia. It just keeps everything going. The machine keeps running all together. And whether they're an institution that's, I mentioned a double whammy, breaking the existing regulations, the very few laws, and making money off of this practice beyond the paycheck, because these scientists are getting hefty paychecks, the abortion doctors, that's a whole other topic. But Planned Parenthood breaking the law and people on camera insinuating and that this is very much the case. It just explained like how that made you feel when you first learned about it, the emotional impact of seeing these institutions exploiting people on multiple levels.
Yeah, learning about the exploitation specifically has been more recent for me, as I have worked with David Daleiden on his recent reports and learned about how they have manipulated consent forms. And then specifically, I started working on a project with Tommy Kearns and his fiance, and just feeling really icked out by it is, first of all, icked out and then outraged. I mean, how dare you do this to Clementine's mom. And Clementine is the baby that was aborted in March of 2024, I believe. And she had her organs harvested, as far as we are able to know, according to the medical documents that we have. And so reading through those medical documents and seeing how they treated Clementine's mom, I mean, as a feminist, I was deeply offended. As a progressive, as you were talking to, Robert, I see these systemic injustices. As a progressive, I tend to see things as systems and to be like, take down the system, boo, fuck the system. And seeing how it's a systemic injustice and seeing how it affected a particular person, and then realizing this is being replicated hundreds, if not thousands of times a year across the United States. This is a universal issue that really made it feel urgent for me.
Elise, there's often a disconnect in how people perceive medical research and where the organs or the tissues come from. What are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions surrounding fetal organ harvesting that you'd like to clear up?
Let's see, the misconceptions. It starts with that it's always from unhealthy babies that had some sort of disease or illness that they needed to be euthanized, quote unquote, and that it was more generous and kind to euthanize them. And then this is something good to do with their bodies. This makes their death worth something, is to donate their bodies. But once you find out how they actually harvested the bodies, and it was not a euthanasia process, it was a murder process, and a really horrific human rights violation. And then you also look at how the women were manipulated. You start to see the bigger picture. And I think a lot of people also don't realize how the women are manipulated by the industry into doing this. Or sometimes they straight up do not give their consent, and they're manipulated into creating documents that imply their consent, and they didn't actually do that. They had no idea this was happening. Those things, I think, need to be cleared up and shown to the public and say, this is wrong. And this is happening, again, in multiple places across the United States, East Coast and West Coast, and it's happening all the time. It's not just happening to sickly babies, it's happening to healthy babies, because for fetal research, you explicitly need healthy tissue. A lot of the time, you need non-anomalous tissue in order to do your research. So you're looking explicitly for healthy babies. And yeah, there are women who want to abort their healthy babies really late in pregnancy for various reasons, and a lot of them are manipulated, and then the industry takes it from there. And so I really want to help protect women from that slippery slope, from being railroaded like that.
So currently, you're working with the Center for Medical Progress, which has done investigations into literal trafficking, law breaking by these abortion businesses of fetal body parts. Can you talk more about the impact of those undercover videos and what do you think the public still doesn't understand or misunderstands about this issue?
Right. We put out a video specifically about UCSD and how they were willing to harvest organs from up to 5 or 6 month old babies, premature infants. They were taking royalties from it, from whatever patents were generated by this research on these babies. They then got the money from it. And in that way, they weren't paid for it, quote unquote, but it was valuable consideration, they said. And I think if you have watched our research videos all the way through, you don't have a lot of questions about it. I think we lay it out pretty explicitly. But the general public, doesn't even know that this exists. It starts with, did you even know fetal research is happening? First of all. And then, oh yeah, maybe I've kind of heard about that. And then you think it's like babies that are maybe like 9 weeks, 10 weeks, like maybe they're less valuable babies or whatever.
And then also maybe that the organ collectors aren't even in the picture until hours or days after the abortion. That's another misconception.
Yeah, that it's not happening right on site because they have to literally put the organs on ice right there. And they have to harvest them fresh from the baby. They can't have decomposition. So, it doesn't happen a few days later. So that's a great point.
Targeting beforehand when the baby's still alive and kicking.
Yeah, for sure. And how they make sure that the baby is alive and kicking. This isn't like taking
in utero, by the way. I want to make sure I'm making that clear.
Yeah, in utero. They check for fetal heartbeats. They check to make sure the baby is alive, and they intentionally do not administer feticide in order to keep these babies fresh and uncontaminated, and then kill them really quickly in the womb or freshly on the counter as they're born. From the documents we have, we believe this is true. And yeah, people think it happens a few days later. It doesn't. It happens within minutes. So that's a baby wriggling on the counter whose lungs are now on ice. That's disgusting.
So, switching gears a little to talk about nonviolent direct action. I have your book in front of me, Rebuilding Pro-Life Nonviolence, that you co-authored with John Kavanaugh O'Keefe. And I made it almost about halfway in your book. I still need to finish it, but I loved every moment of it. I took so many notes, as you can
Wow.
see, underlining. Yeah, so I've really enjoyed your book. And so I'm just curious if you believe, why do you believe that nonviolent direct action is an essential or an underused tool in the pro-life movement?
Yeah, I think that nonviolent direct action, a lot of people associate it as a leftist communist tactic, but it's not. It has been proven, no matter what your orientation is, to be an effective social intervention. And ultimately, I think why it's important to the pro-life movement is because it humanizes the babies. It's a transfer of your humanity to them symbolically, but also through your concrete body. By standing in their place in solidarity, you exhibit that they're people, because who would stand for an idea? Who would stand for a potential person? You don't do that. You stand for real people, and you show then that they are worth sacrificing for. And again, you would never sacrifice for a non-person. So it rehumanizes these babies through your sacrifice. And so that's why I think it's really important to do nonviolent direct action, especially like rescues where you stand in front of clinics, or you stand inside of clinics, or you go inside and you hand out roses, and you somehow try to physically intervene. And beyond just sidewalk counseling. Sidewalk counseling is kind of a physical intervention, but it goes beyond that. It's like, no, I'm literally trying to get in your face about it because I'm trying to stop you. And I'm trying to challenge a law or status quo by doing this. And I think that's really important. I'm included in this. Not enough people are doing this, including myself. I need to do it more often. I have done it a few times, but I think it's really important that eventually we get back out there and we start to make serious sacrifices and take on jail time and take on social consequences and become felons and do everything we can to save these people, to prove that they're people. It really hurts my heart because even a lot of pro-lifers, I think, do not actually believe that preborn people are equal to us. They honestly also see them as potential people. Potential people matter, but not so much that I should like go to jail for it. And I'm saying, no, these are real people. These are actual people right now being slaughtered. And this is where it becomes religious for me. If I want to be like Jesus and give up my life for people and sacrifice my body for people, then I need to go put my body between the oppressed and the oppressor, which is the abortionist and the babies at this point, or whatever else I can do. If I could find wherever they're manufacturing abortion pills and go physically stop it somehow, non-violently, I would. I just don't know where it is right now.
I remember having a conversation with one of the rescuers from the 2023 trial, and it was just so clear that the nonviolent portion of nonviolent direct action, that's communicating that we cannot use weapons of war. Like, for example, there was that recent story in the news about this um, guy who was like, F humanity, people, I didn't give any consent to being born, and he's just anti-life in all ways. He tried to blow up part of an IVF clinic, and I think the entrance might have been demolished. Thankfully, the babies were safe,
Good.
and that no person other than himself was mortally wounded. Weapons of war are not part of nonviolent direct action.
Never.
Taking the blows, that's a tool, that's your choice. You can't bring harm in nonviolent direct action. It's all about removing harm from the equation, stopping business hours. And what's another example you would say of how nonviolent direct action looks when you're putting yourself on the line?
Let's see, outside of rescue, there's a lot of interventions you can do. You can do pro-life propaganda on the streets, quote unquote graffiti. Some people call that culture jamming. You see a lot of pro-choice graffiti on the streets. I'm saying that as a person who lives in a major city. And then counteracting it by putting up your own. Again, that's not legal, so I'm not going to endorse that officially, but that would
It's
be a
putting
form,
yourself on the
that
line.
would be a form of nonviolent direct action, technically. Yeah, that's putting yourself on the line and crossing a boundary that is preventing you from protecting people and saying, I'm not going to stand for it. You're not going to keep me from keeping my message to myself. I'm going to put my message out there whether you like it or not. So that's an example. There's lots of other small ways and really big ways you can do nonviolent direct action. Technically, running for president would be a nonviolent direct action where you're directly intervening in the legislative process that is complicit in keeping the baby killing industry alive. So none of those things are rescue, like culture jamming and political stunts are not rescue, but they are nonviolent direct action.
What would you say is a simple definition of the term direct action? I've got one, but you're our guest.
I guess I am the guest. I feel like yours is going to be better than mine. Direct action is any direct intervention that challenges the status quo or the statutes that are keeping a form of oppression alive.
What I would add to it is that we're not relying on an intermediary to do it. Like, for example, making a phone call to your elected representative, like here being a Californian up in Sacramento, or our senator in DC for California. It's not doing that. It's not having the go between. It's doing the thing yourself. While your legislator would be able to directly enact a vote, make a change that way, it's looking at what are our options for making a change directly without any go between, and being able to save a life by shutting down the business hours of the clinic. That's the clear example with rescues.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it too. And yeah, call it DIY. It's do-it-yourself activism. It's not trying to activate other people in the middle, like you said. It's trying to get the thing done yourself. So I really support that kind of activism in pro-life circles, and I hope to see more of it.
Definitely. Anything that's principled, anything that's strategic, thought through, you have a goal, you have a way to succeed at the goal. It's very important that people act on smart ideas that really have potential to teach someone, save a life, to anything in between.
Yeah, and
And
ultimately,
also,
ultimately, direct action puts the powers that be in what's called a decision dilemma, where they've got to decide between two bad options. For example, I make a fool of myself by hurting these nonviolent protesters and then showing how violent I am, exposing my violence, or I let them do what they're doing and let them stop me from doing the violence that I was doing covertly. And then you got to decide, am I going to look like a fool, or am I going to let them win? That's kind of what it becomes, especially when you rescue at an abortion clinic, when you stand there, hand out roses, sit in it at the clinic, and you say, okay, you either have to take away me or you have to take away the abortionist, because one of us is getting arrested today, and you're going to prove what side you're on by arresting one of us. It forces them to think about who is doing the violence here. And if the violence is standing there peacefully, or I don't like the word peacefully. I don't think direct action is peaceful. I think it's purposefully agitatory. But standing there benignly, like you're not going to hurt anybody by standing there, and then somebody hurts you because of that, I think that says a lot about which side you should be on, and exposes the structure that is protecting the oppression that you're trying to expose.
So some may view protesting or civil disobedience as too extreme or unproductive. I'm doing air quotation marks if you're not watching this in video form. So how could you respond to those concerns, especially in cases where the injustice is so hidden or institutionalized?
Right, too extreme or unproductive. First of all, I would say, what form of activism is productive? Please point me to a way that trying to educate to legislate has been productive. Like you can say we got the Supreme Court to,
I'm triggered.
we got the Supreme Court to overturn Roe, sure. But you know how long that took and how many babies' lives that took? You're not going to see the fruit the day that you plant the seed, as we say. So direct action is a lot of planting seeds, and you're not going to see the fruit the same day. Sometimes you do, and that's awesome, and that makes it a spectacle. But not always. Sometimes the fruit comes down the road. So I would start by redefining what you mean by productivity, especially because it's like a very capitalist term, and I'm a progressive, so I'm like, why are we defining anything by productivity? Okay, and then after that, it's looking at extremism. You know what? It is extreme. But again, what are you doing to humanize the babies? How is talking to your friends about the babies humanizing the baby? Like, I guess it kind of is, but it's not taking their place with your body and giving them a visceral experience of the baby through yourself. That's very different. It's when you create an encounter with the baby through yourself, rather than just trying to explain it in intellectual ways and making the baby an abstract idea, it makes it concrete. I mean, when you're standing there, you put the baby between the mother and the abortionist. You're metaphorically, but also by physically being here, I am holding your baby in front of you and saying, what are you going to do? And a lot of women turn away because of that. Not all of them. Rescue isn't 100% successful by any means, and no direct action is. We shouldn't expect that kind of success rate. Again, the productivity thing is crazy to me. There's no such thing. But the idea is that it's communicative. So if we're looking for concrete results from it, you're looking at the wrong criteria for direct action. That's not especially what rescues are about. Communicating the humanity of the preborn and being in solidarity with them and doing a last act of love for them. This is the last thing you can do before this baby is slaughtered. Is you can go with them as far as you can and say, I'm not going to let you do this to them. And then you're taken down because of it. That's the most love I can think you can give somebody, honestly. It's a radical act of love, an extreme act of love, you might even say. And because of that, I don't think it's too extreme. I don't think love is ever too extreme. Even extreme love is not too extreme.
As long as it's love.
Never violent.
That reminds me of spokespeople in the sidewalk outreach professional world who've said that there's no data on how many babies have been saved, how effective of a strategy is rescue, but we do have the data on peaceful, prayerful sidewalk ministering, and the data shows that this is effectful, and that's just a really good point about how many babies were saved. It's about how many babies were loved.
Yeah, that's a common rescue refrain. If you read Shattering the Darkness, shout out, that is going to say that a lot and talk about how, again, it's not the productivity that matters, it's the act of loving itself that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just an act of love that goes further than sidewalk counseling. It just is because it physically goes further.
Totally. I remember when I first learned about the tactic of nonviolent resistance rescue, everything I knew was just suddenly crumbling. And because I had been doing sidewalk outreach for 3 years weekly, going out there 3 hours at a time, 3 days out of the week, I was doing the sidewalk thing. And then once I had this paradigm shift of like, wait, you're telling me there is another way to show that I radically love this children by just crossing the property line? Just everything was, what? I couldn't believe. And I remember just crying, thinking I could have done more. All those years, I just stood there. Why did I just stand? I'm sure God honors the work that I did out there, but then learning of this way that my love could have gone even deeper just really made me feel like, oh my gosh, all those years I just stood there. But I know for some people, if you've never been out to the sidewalk, just standing there, that's a lot. But anyway, so that's just me when I first learned about rescue, just having this come to Jesus moment and crying of why didn't I do more all those years? But you do your best with the knowledge you have at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just so important that the pro-life community knows that rescue is a viable tool option for example, helping prevent these children from being targeted by fetal tissue researchers. How do we keep fetal tissue research and fetal organ harvesting from being our perspective, our message, our voice against this? How do we keep it from being dismissed as a partisan or a religious talking point, especially when people across beliefs can find common ground in ethical research and in bodily dignity?
Right? Partisan or religious. I think it starts with showing people the evidence, the medical records that prove that this isn't just happening to these mythical 8-week, 9-week, 10-week babies. They're happening to premature infant age babies. And saying, first, aren't you outraged by this? Like these are micro preemies that we would try to keep alive in a NICU, and we're just killing them. Isn't that a problem to you? And for a lot of people, it isn't a problem, which is problematic in itself. But if you have a reasonable middle of the road person that says, actually, yeah, that's like too late in pregnancy, and I really have a problem with that, then you can start pushing. I mean, I would do this later, like literally weeks later in a different conversation with them and be like, well, why is that so different from an 8-week, 9-week, 10-week baby? And then you really have to start pushing fetal personhood at that point and say that, it doesn't really matter when this research is taking place. It's still ultimately the killing itself in order to get the body parts is a human rights violation.
What would you say to those who are hearing about fetal organ harvesting for the first time? Like, what would be the next right step they could take, personally or politically, in countering this?
So you've just heard about fetal organ harvesting, and what are you going to do next? Let's see. I would first encourage them to keep spreading awareness. Like, you've learned about it. Can you tell someone else about it? Can you hint at it? Can you please just, if you hear people say that it's not real, just say, no, I disagree. Can you at least create condescension in your circles about it? That would be awesome. And then from awareness to, have you tried writing a legislator? Have you tried talking to somebody? That's a great start. And then most extreme would be, yeah, direct action and saying, have you looked into where your local fetal body parts harvesters are? Have you even tried? And if you find out, what are you going to do? You're going to try to stop it. And so you could go in and start like yelling about it, for example, at the clinic. You don't have to yell. But
You don't have to.
I'm thinking
As
of
long as
like
your message is
specifically
clear,
Teresa
yelling
Bukovanak
shouldn't.
doing that at UCS.
Yeah. As long as your message is clear, projecting shouldn't be looked on as a negative.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
getting the message out clearly. That's a success.
That's the success. So talking calmly about it, if that's your style. But have you thought about maybe actually trying to prevent it by being there? That would be the final step. But yeah, first step would be just spreading more awareness.
What kind of language or framing do you think is most effective when speaking about fetal tissue trafficking to people outside of the pro-life bubble? So maybe what would be a good way to present this from a secular perspective to bring people on board that this is wrong?
I hate to say it, I'm a shock tactic person. So how have I brought it up to like my best friends? For example, when I got put on the project with Clementine's parents, I told my best friends there was a baby who was killed on the counter, and they sliced open her chest while she was alive and took out her heart and her organs and put them on ice. And they go, who would do that to a baby? And then I'm like, well, this baby wasn't an abortion. And then they go, oh. But it gets them to start thinking about it, they're like, then they have to think, what is so different between a baby that wasn't aborted and a baby that was aborted and then birthed alive during the abortion and then killed? And then, are you really okay with the fact that they're being killed in the womb, if that's so disturbing that it's happening on the counter? And then you have to explain to them exactly how the death in the womb happens, either through like a lethal injection that is opposed by most humanitarian organizations, or through exsanguination, which is definitely opposed by humanitarian and animal rights organizations, or through straight up dismemberment, which, who doesn't oppose that? Once you really start to get into, this is not euthanasia. This is not a gentle death where you lull them into an overdose of anesthesia like you would a dog. This is not an overdose of anesthesia. This is inducing cardiac arrest. This is dismemberment. This is bleeding them out. Once you start to be real with them and use the colloquial terms for these very scientific sounding things like exsanguination,
or disarticulation,
or things like that, thank you, then I think it starts to really hit them like, this is wrong, this should not be happening. But a lot of people will still be like, I just don't even want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I just want to stand back from it. It's not my business. And then I have to say, are you comfortable with a genocide? A lot of people don't want to call it a genocide because that's not technically accurate. Are you okay with mass murder of babies? Like 200 babies, 500 babies, 1,000 babies? We don't know exactly how many babies are being harvested from, but we do know how many are being requested by these research studies, and it's a lot. It's in the hundreds. Are you okay with even a few hundred babies being murdered, and you've done nothing about it, and it's happening in your backyard, in your state? In your state, possibly in your town. It's definitely happening in your country. Are you okay with the fact that you're standing by and letting this happen? And then I hope from there people will really start to think about it and be like, maybe I'm not so okay with it. Maybe I at least need to think about gestational limits on abortions or gestational limits on fetal research. I'm a gradualist, so I'm like, it's okay if we start with gestational limits and then we work from there and then get more protections for the younger babies. But we got to start somewhere. We got to at least convince people that older babies are worth saving.
If the majority of the people are willing to protect them, have that, outlook,
that'll save dozens of babies. And then I say to pro-lifers, are you okay with saving dozens of babies? So if it really bothers you that we're only saving dozens, I'm going to question why it bothers you.
what's something that gives you hope right now in this area of advocacy?
I'm going to be honest, it's a hard question. I've been feeling not great recently. What gives me hope? What gives me hope is that I see stories like Clementine's parents, and I see people coming out of the woodwork and saying this is wrong and this happened to me. And I can't explain why these people are doing what they're doing. I can't explain like how they somehow coincidentally got all this information that convinced them this is the right thing to do. It just gives me hope that the greater picture, the universe, your God, whatever you think is out there, the higher power is directing us towards justice. And if you don't believe in a higher power, I hope you believe that the universe is kind of directed towards justice, like entropy eventually brings us towards justice. I don't know. But I think there is hope in that these things happen and they present opportunities that we didn't have before, and we can really humanize these babies through these individual interactions and also show that it affects regular people like you and me. So yeah, stories like Clementine's parents really give me hope. And just the persistence of other activists. I'm so glad there's other people that have seen what I've seen and that aren't okay with it and aren't ever going to be okay with it, and that I know will keep speaking out. So even when we're all beaten down and tired, we have each other, and I think that really matters, and that gives me hope.
Having community and connection with all the people whose eyes are directed toward this is such, such an important, heartwarming thing. Seeing all these people who've come around this, not just issue, but this injustice together, it really inspires me to continue to do more, to stay active, to stay in the fight. Because as long as we have people to do this with, I don't see how we can be discouraged for long whenever our emotions take us in that negative path, which is the likely thing to happen when what we're facing is just so heinous. But the people are there to lift us up for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So, winding down our time together, can you give our listeners, viewers, a call to action? How can anyone get involved in direct action or education or investigative efforts?
Oh, that's a lot of different things. Let's start with direct action. Go out there, go to your grocery store, buy some roses, go into an abortion clinic, start handing them out. And as you're handing them out, say, we have free resources for you. Come talk to me outside. Free resources for you and your family. Free resources for you and your family. Free resources for you and you and you and your family and everybody. So that's a great way to get started in direct action. Maybe that's a little too brave for some people, but maybe less direct. Put up a sticker on your local stop sign that says "Stop Abortion." That'd be cool. something small. With education, share posts from Center for Medical Progress, share posts from Secular Pro-Life. When you see people sharing things that go into denial of the reality of these things, please send them the counter evidence. Do that. And then in investigative stuff, that's a little harder to get into, but you could start sending freedom of information requests to your own governments, trying to figure out what's happening at these abortion centers, what's happening at my local college, what's happening at my alma mater. Like, I think about mine, Virginia Commonwealth University, and I was so shocked when David Daleiden told me, "Oh, that's a harvesting center too." I was like, "My school? My school?" And it could be anybody's school. Lots of places do it. So start looking into it. Start asking the real questions of your government. The records are out there. That's what's so crazy, is these are public records. The records are out there. We just have to ask for them and then find them. And it's a hard process, but that's a great way you can get started.
So tell our listeners, how can they support your work and where can people go to find you?
But yeah, supporting my work, you can follow me on Anti-Personhood, which is my Instagram. I'm also on Tumblr as Secular Pro-Life Conspectus, and I really just thrive off of the interactions of other people. So comment on my posts, share them. It gives me hope. So yeah, that's the best way to support me.
Great. And I'm definitely going to include all those in the podcast description. And I will include the link to your amazing book, Rebuilding Pro-Life Nonviolent.
Yeah, that thing. And that actually does help me financially too. So if you buy the book, I do get a small donation. So that's cool.
Great. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Elise, for taking the time to chat with us today. This was such a good conversation, and I'm definitely going to have to re-listen to this for all the golden nuggets that you shared.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Robert, and thank you for what you do. Bye-bye.